Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of Serverless Office Hours, aka Serverless Air. We have a special guest with us today, Chris Anderson from the Microsoft Azure Functions team. Chris, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, like I said, I'm Chris. I'm from the Azure Functions team, one of the PMs that work on the team, focus a lot on the kind of core infrastructure and the programming models that we have, and recently a lot of monitoring.
Cool. And for people that can't see, he's rocking the serverless shirt today, so I appreciate that.
Not slouch anymore. I was like, this is a perfect day to rock this out.
Nice. Cool. So yeah, man, I wanted to get you on here to really dive deep into what's going over there with Azure Functions. But before we jump into that, for the uninitiated, what exactly is Azure Functions?
I mean, Azure Functions is your, serverless functions as a service kind of model. Our whole thing is you write a bit of code. We've got the portal editor. We've got the kind of local tooling if you want instead. You write that, put it on the cloud, and we scale, like crazy to go ahead and kind of meet any demand that you have, and we charge you per execution. So it's really all about trying to make it so that you get to focus on just writing a function, just telling what event you want. We have some cool things like bindings that make it easy to work with other services without having to bring in other SDKs, so you get to code less. So serverless and codeless, I guess. And then, the goal there is that you solve your problem and get on with your life.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, and I want to dive into a bunch of the specifics, kind of that you just touched on there. But before we do that, like, how would you compare it to, like a lot of our audience is familiar with AWS Lambda. What are some of the main differences or similarities there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of the kind of core experiences that you'd expect, it's very similar. You're going to start out by writing a function. Generally, for like JavaScript, you're going to be exporting a method that's going to get invoked. We have some cool things there. I guess the AWS Lambda just recently started to support a Node.js 6, but we've been doing that for a while. So for a while, that was really nice because you could be writing ES6 without having to do Babel or anything along those lines. We support you returning promises, which I'm not sure if AWS Lambda does, but that's made a lot of people's lives easier. Just you don't have to actually worry about calling that done method. You can just return a promise, and we'll go ahead and wait for that promise to finish. We have, of course, bindings and things along those lines that, we can get deeper into those, but essentially it makes it easy to communicate with other Azure services without having to do any additional SDKs, which is really nice. I frankly much prefer to just stick with like the data rather than having to worry about how this particular SDK works, worrying about retry for using that SDK, things along those lines. So it can be nice to use the binding model. You can always bring in your own SDK like you normally would with AWS Lambda, but you don't have to for a lot of common scenarios. Other things, we don't have like the magic function power that you have to choose to figure out the resources. We'll actually go ahead and look at what your function's trying to use and scale up the resources both vertically and horizontally to figure out like what should you be using. And we only charge you for what we see you using. So that way you don't have to figure out what the right power setting is for you. We kind of try to optimize that for you. So it kind of removes that responsibility from you, which I think makes it feel just a little bit more serverless because I don't want to have to be thinking about my resource utilization. I just want to write some code and move on.
Right. And you're talking about the RAM setting. Like you don't need to worry about that.
Because that thing also ends up controlling, I think, in the AWS space. I honestly don't fully know. I'm fairly sure that would also control CPU and also maybe some network limitations and things along those lines. So like if that magic power setting, you have to get that right because if you move it up, you can double the speed of your application because it's CPU bound, not memory bound. It's not necessarily obvious. We had a lot of customers who struggled to figure out what that setting was when we first started out and we had that setting. And then before we GA'd, we actually removed it because we just found that we could do mostly for everyone, a good job of guessing what it is. There's still the occasional person who's like, no, I really, really want to control things. But for a lot of people, they're just happy to know that they're, it's kind of the promise of serverless, right? I'm only going to pay for what I use. So like here, I can never even over provision myself in terms of the amount of memory I'm trying to reserve or whatever.
Yeah, I like that. It's also like the idea that less dials to turn. You just set your code and kind of forget it. So kudos on that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think the other major piece then would be that a lot of our code is open source, and we do our development out in the open. So Like, I'm sure that you'll ask me like what new features we have coming down the lines or something like that. My answer is going to be the ones that I think are cool, but a lot of them are just there on GitHub. Like a lot of our people who work with us are actually submitting issues to us. Some of them are sending PRs to us for things. It's really fun to work in that model because we don't have to be very like closed mouth about what we're doing for most things, which is pretty good. And then that also means that you can run our stuff wherever you really feel like it. Right now we have like some weird .NET dependencies that make it funny, but we're moving to running on .NET Core, which will pretty much open up the world to run functions wherever you want to. But we think that Azure Functions will be the best place to run them. So that's kind of interesting stuff for us.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely have some questions about like the local dev story and what have you coming up. But you mentioned real quickly that you guys have supported Node 6 for a while. What other runtimes do you guys support? Because I know that is another differentiator.
Yeah, I mean, as far as one thing, we get some credit for having more language support, but I think that's actually unfair because we only have 3 languages that I'd actually consider production quality, which is Node.js 6.5.0. We've got C#, and F#. You can do any .NET thing really. So if you really want to do VB.NET, you can do that as well. You just have to use a precompiled assembly. We'll go ahead and we have F# script and C# script. So you can just write C# in the portal and we'll compile it for you. Or you can upload a compiled binary like you would on AWS Lambda for C#, I think. We have Python, PHP, Bash, PowerShell. I think those are the ones in kind of an experimental mode. They run a little bit slow. They have a lot of cold start, things along those lines. We have some improvements in mind to make those things better, which is the reason I say we shouldn't deserve credit. I mean, they're nice to use. Like, Batch and Bash and PowerShell, like they're not going to run any faster than they currently are. So I guess you could consider those things as support. But you should be using those things, I guess, for like automation. That can be nice, but you're not going to be doing that for anything super high scale because there's going to be a lot of cold start going on there if you do those things. So for background automation purposes, they can be nice. And our PHP and Python support is very, very cold. So you just want to be careful. Like it works there. If you just want some kind of background script, once again, you don't care about a bit of cold start here and there, it's fine. But if you're worried, if you're trying to write an HTTP application, you shouldn't use Python and PHP on us right now. They're still in preview.
Interesting. Yeah, that was one of the things that kind of originally caught my eye. You guys support so many runtimes. So with cold starts, what are you guys doing to kind of mitigate some of those issues? Like, or rather, I guess, how does it work on Azure? When you spin up an Azure function, is it kind of warm and then another request coming in hits that warm function, or how specifically does that work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So like our biggest cold start problem ends up being you haven't made a request in a while, and then you make your first request. Then like we didn't know that you wanted anything. We don't have anything provisioned for you because obviously we did provision. You weren't trying to use us. And then your first request comes in, and there we have to spin up. We don't spin up a new VM. We go and take an already running hot VM, hot host, and then basically give it your code and say, hey, go and handle this person's events. So we try to do as much as possible before we know that you wanted an event to be ready for your event. But there still comes the time where you need to give us your code, and then your code has to instantiate itself before we can actually have your function run. As far as what we're doing to help improve times there, a lot of it will come down to trying to make you write code which loads faster. So for instance, with Node.js, I wrote a tool recently that webpacks your function. And it works for everything that isn't a native module, which kind of sucks, but Webpack doesn't really work with native modules very well. Right. But essentially, for the vast majority of the modules I've tested, it works great to just take your application, compile it down to a single file. And we've seen load times that previously, even on an SSD, were 2 seconds for like a very, very large complex node method, get dropped down to under 100 milliseconds of startup time. So Webpack makes a humongous difference, which makes sense because like we already use Webpack on the browser for the exact same set of problems. It's just on the server side, we're all so used to the fact that that server is going to be long running, and I don't care if it takes 30 seconds to start up. It's fine because it's going to run for the next 3 days, and I'm going to have other instances to load balance. It's not the case in serverless. Like that first request, you need it to be as fast as possible. So we're trying to invest in like education and tools to make it so that you write code which starts faster.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, there was a little lag there.
Yeah, there's like I know the camera is a little bit like slow right here.
Yeah, I thought my computer froze. I was like, oh no, live broadcast.
I'll go by myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. So with the Webpack stuff, that's something that we're kind of testing out as well. So like requiring in those modules at runtime, that's what's adding the additional latency. And
Exactly.
with Webpack, okay.
Exactly. So like go, if you like, just on your local machine, don't worry about serverless or anything like that. Put it on your SSD just to prove yourself that it's running off of even a fast driver. And you're generally not getting SSDs when you're running on Azure right now for functions. So like that's the best case scenario. We're still saying for something like Lodash that it's taking like a couple hundred milliseconds to load Lodash if you don't actually shrink it back down again. And fortunately, Lodash and a bunch of other people are finally going to start going down the ES6 module route, so you can go ahead and just require a single piece of Lodash. You don't have to require the entire thing of Lodash. But there's still going to be a lot of libraries that are going to be stuck in the past, and Webpack is honestly going to be the best solution for that. Just trying to reduce the number of files that are actually being loaded. The problem ends up being that Node.js just relies very, very heavily when it's doing the requires on file system reads. And so that's just going to end up killing you, because having to go to disk as you're trying to run an application is always the first thing you want to eliminate. So the nice thing about Webpacking is it has a single disk read, and it's just when the application starts.
Oh, that's awesome. What kind of impact does that have on looking at source maps or what have you when you're trying to debug?
Yeah, so Webpack fortunately has the ability to go ahead and set up source maps. So as long as you don't then uglify your Webpack, for the most part, you can actually still get kind of debugging when you are running locally. Webpack itself, when you look at the source that Webpack generates, actually looks exactly like your source, except for all the require statements have been removed with their special Webpack require statements. So even if you didn't have the source map links, it's actually still fairly human readable. And if you add the source map links, it'll work with your JavaScript. I'm not sure if they have like a TypeScript or CoffeeScript to Webpack converter with like source maps yet. That's probably my next place to investigate, because we're trying to get CoffeeScript and TypeScript kind of working smoothly with functions as well.
Yeah, that's interesting though. Like with Webpack 2, tree shaking, and
awesome.
Then bundling all of your code together, you get leaner code, and like you're mentioning, you're not hitting that file system. So
exactly,
definitely a good tip for people out there trying to optimize their functions. Awesome. So with Azure functions, what are the different like types of events that you can trigger functions off of?
We have HTTP, and we also have special handlers for webhooks. So like GitHub webhooks will authenticate them for you, so you don't have to write that code inside of your function. That's a theme of us. We try to make it so that we do common things for you, so you don't have to write that code inside of your function. Then you get down to like the normal kind of asynchronous message-based ones. We have Azure Storage Queues, Azure Service Bus Queues, Service Bus Topics, Event Hubs, which is like Kinesis or Kafka. And then we have a few other things, like we do have blob triggers, and we also have the ability to trigger off of an external file, so something like a Dropbox file or OneDrive file being uploaded. We can also trigger off of events like that. And that's about the collection of messages. A lot of services can create those types of messages, and so kind of in a similar way to, I think AWS Lambda uses SNS a lot to have other services communicate with Lambda. We can do that the same with a lot of our queues.
Cool. And what's kind of the difference? We talked a little bit about this at the beginning. When you're setting up your functions, you guys have the concept of binding.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dive into that. Like, what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. So once again, I'll frame it kind of in a reference to AWS Lambda, which I know most of your customers kind of come from the background of. Serverless has made it very easy to use AWS Lambda, fortunately for a lot of your customers. I think the biggest difference, like if you look at what you're going to get when you have a message coming from AWS Lambda, you're going to be getting an event object that has just a bunch of information about that event, right? And it's up to you to then go and take that event data and go and fetch something from that given service in a lot of cases. For instance, like a new blob being messaged, you're going to have to go look up that blob using that information. For the other ones like Kinesis, things like that, you'll actually get the messages themselves. You don't have to fetch those. But for blobs, for instance, we'll use that one as an example. You're just going to be given a path to the blob and information about how to go look up that blob. The big difference that we have is that we are built off of this framework that we call the WebJobs framework on Azure. And it was really popular within our own little bubble of Azure customers, but it didn't really have much exposure outside of Azure. And it was kind of, one of the original like write a function, have it react to an event thing. You just had to kind of host it on your own compute. There was no like service which ran WebJobs. And functions was really us just taking WebJobs and then hosting it up as a service for you, so you didn't have to figure out how to deploy it yourself. And the idea there with the original WebJobs SDK was to make it so we had to abstract away the services you talk to. So we not only wanted you to be able to react to events from those services, but we wanted to abstract away those services from your code itself, so you could write simpler code. So right now, if you have a blob trigger that happens inside of Azure, it'll actually give you a stream object if you want to, or a byte array object, or you'll get just an event object if you want to do it all yourself with the SDK. But essentially through strong typing or through flags that you set when you actually set up the connection for the Node.js case, which doesn't have strong types, we'll actually go ahead and figure out what kind of data to send you. And we can give you just a stream. And to send data back out to the same blob storage, we'll give you a stream that then streams out. And so you can just do stream in, stream out, and never have to actually talk to blobs at all. You never even have to load in that SDK to your code. I can just do my image resizing or whatever all in line, and you can do many outputs, many inputs. So that way I could have an image that I wanted to have come in and resize to 3 different sizes, thumbnail, medium, and large or whatever. And then out would come 3 different sizes all in the same function if I wanted to.
Gotcha. That's cool. That's that is kind of, it's a kind of a weird quirk. You got to go to S3, grab back the object, and do what you want on it. But you guys passing through that data is just like one step away from me, the developer, that doesn't need to deal with that.
And there's no copy pasters. You don't have to worry about what is the best practices for using that SDK. Like, this is where we kind of came from originally, and it's one of the reasons that we were really excited to kind of go off and build WebJobs as a service. Was the WebJobs was already saving people a lot of time and hassle when it came to actually like reacting to services, and the ability to kind of take Azure Functions and turn it into Azure, or Azure WebJobs and turn it into Azure Functions, was big for us, because it let us then solve the deployment issues, scaling issues, things along those lines that serverless just naturally does well.
Right. Cool. So let's talk about like some real world use cases. What's some of the most interesting things you've seen people doing with Azure Functions?
I mean, I think overall the most interesting thing about how I see people using functions and serverless in general is just how simple all the use cases are for the most part. Like 95% of what I see people doing out there is stuff they would have previously dreaded having to do, because it was going to be boring work that have required a lot of hassle just to get it kind of up and running reliably. And now that I can go ahead and have like a timer that goes off and cleans up my database without having to do any real hassle at all to make that work, that's like transformational for so many developers. They're just like, hey, I wrote this thing, it's now running on its own. I can just trust that it's going to deal with it and scale as I need to. Like that alone has been like the biggest thing for me. Was I expected it to come out and everything would just be weird use cases everywhere. And instead I'm seeing a whole lot more, we're seeing mostly just normal generic things. It'd be hard to put up in a keynote, which is kind of a struggle for us when we're trying to market the thing. But right, for developers, it makes a huge difference. Like just how happy everyone is who's tried using functions and walked away like solving a problem faster than they've ever done it previously before, cloud or no cloud. As far as there are still a few interesting use cases. I think the most interesting one we have is there's this company called Plexure, based out of New Zealand, I think. And they actually, we're open source, including our portal UI. So like our editor that you see there, that's all open source as well. It's an Angular 2 application. Okay, cool. And they saw that, and they're like, oh, hey, it'd be really cool if we could actually just let people who are using our platform, they have like an IoT kind of orchestration service they offer. So like a customer walks into your business, and they detect based off of that customer having their app on your phone or whatever, that you walked into the business. And that can trigger a workflow. And so maybe you detect them, you look at what they like, and then you send them a notification to their phone with like a coupon for something that you think that they'd be likely to buy if they just had a coupon. So you're trying to get it so that when a customer enters your business, they walk out more often with merchandise, things along those lines. So it's a really, really cool platform, a really cool product in the first place. And it's built using a lot of really awesome software, like Azure Logic Apps is one of the things that helps them do the orchestration underneath the covers. If you guys don't know what Logic Apps is, it's very similar to step functions, only it's it GA'd like last September. So it's been out for a while, and you can use it in production use cases. So you don't have to worry about the preview status like step functions right now. But so they've got that, and they were writing all these cool connectors. So like each step of the flow, they were writing these connectors, and they started using functions to write the connectors because we scaled it automatically. So if you had a popular connector, we scaled out. If it was kind of boring and didn't get used very much, they didn't have to worry about provisioning any scale for it. And then they're like, wait, we're writing these things all ourselves, but functions are so simple. Why don't we just take their open source portal UI and copy paste it into our code base and restyle it so it actually looks native to their experience, and then connect it to their own subscriptions. So they're now hosting their customers' Azure functions on their subscriptions. So their customers don't have to pay for it. And they're letting them write their code inside of their portals. They're essentially reselling Azure functions for us. That's a nice thing for us. But for their customers, they never have to open up a Azure or AWS or Google Cloud subscription. A lot of these people are just like, they might be like hobby developers or business developers where they can write a bit of code, but they wouldn't be able to write an Azure service, and they'd be really worried about maintaining an Azure subscription. And they've now enabled this whole new class of people to go write some code and customize the way their business runs. It's really, really cool.
Right. I think it's like the next step past webhooks.
Yeah.
The SaaS could offer this transform layer of custom code.
Exactly.
We're gonna see that popping up everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah, I half expected WebTask to like announce that recently because they spent a lot of time doing the whole like Slack WebTask thing, and I secretly think that like Glenn and Tomek are just like pounding away and they're getting ready to release some kind of awesome beast like that.
Yeah, indeed. Awesome. And yeah, like you mentioned, like there are a ton of different like use cases of serverless technology, but a lot of them, like you mentioned, they're not super sexy, but they're things that like doing in the past would be a huge pain, just to like set up either on your local machine or set up a box somewhere to run a cron for you. Just the sheer fact that you can do that without really having to worry about it, you set it and forget it. I think just opens up a myriad of possibilities for people to do stuff and automate away.
Empowering them to do their job better, like making people so they can just, I always like to say, I think I just say this too often at this point, so it feels cheesy to me, but, really focusing on solving your business problems and not worrying about creating new technical problems to bog yourself down with, right? I've got this thing my boss told me I have to go do. I can go write a function and it'll do it, and I don't have to worry about maintaining that thing, too much. I've still got to make sure that I've got, because no ops is a lie, right? But like, I still have to set an alert to make sure my logic is working correctly. There's not too many errors coming out of that function, things along those lines. But as long as the thing is looking like it's healthy, not returning any errors, things along those lines, I'm not gonna have to worry about, making sure there's an OS patch. I'm not gonna have to worry about making sure I have enough scale provisioned ahead of time, so that way I don't have to, worry about any of these things. I mean, these are the common kind of serverless tropes, so I feel like our audience probably knows them, but it does continuously amaze me that it's still those simple things that make functions in serverless so special.
Indeed. So you mentioned your guys' web UI. I played around with it. It's pretty slick, and it has some pretty solid Git integration.
Yeah.
Some other kudos on that.
It has IntelliSense baked in for JavaScript, and it's the same IntelliSense that powers Visual Studio Code. So for any Node.js developers that like Visual Studio Code, it's more or less the exact same code base.
Gotcha. Cool. And yeah, my question was like, do you see people using Azure functions? Are they typically using the web UI or are they developing locally?
So we're still seeing a lot of people using the web UI because I think that's what we came out with first, and that's what a lot of people expect when they come to serverless. But we know from the various user research things and things along those lines that we've done that people just prefer to stay local. I think that's one of the reasons that serverless framework has done so well, was it enabled such a positive local workflow for a lot of developers. Most people don't want to work out of a browser, I think, when it comes down to doing serious work. That's just my opinion. I think that other people can be very successful working entirely out of the portal, but I think for a lot of people, they do appreciate that local experience. So back in last summer, we invested in getting our runtime in a kind of a very easy npm install kind of fashion. It still only works for Windows laptops, which excludes like half the population out there. We're working hard on getting it to move to .NET Core, so that way it'll run on Mac, Linux, and Windows, and that'll be really, really important for us. You can track that on GitHub and watch us complain about the various things that we're still struggling to make that work. But the goal there is to make it so it runs on all of them, and that way we don't have this weird lock-in for those just Windows local development there. Our serverless framework tooling, of course, works cross-platform, but as far as like the being able to run the host locally enables you to like attach a debugger to the live running runtime and like figure out what was going wrong with your code rather than having to do like, just trace statements, which is, it's so amazing. Like so many issues I've solved when I'm trying to write my own demos and things along those lines have been solved by just attaching a debugger. It's great.
Right. Yeah. I saw one of your demos a couple days ago, and that's what I saw, the debug flag. And basically you were stepping through your actual code I think it was in the web UI, or maybe it was in VS Code. But it was, that was pretty impressive. And that's, so I'm looking forward to trying that out myself.
Yeah, I think, it'd be really cool, definitely kind of going forward, if we can, when we get the tooling running on all platforms. And I know like Serverless is working on trying to, Serverless Frameworks actually, we're trying to make it so that you can write code which is agnostic of the underlying, cloud provider. We're actually looking forward to maybe even being able to power like local debugging for even Serverless Framework from that point of view. So there's a lot of cool things that we think we can do by making sure that that works everywhere, and hopefully it'll work with Serverless Framework as well.
Cool. Yeah, and for those watching that aren't familiar, like the serverless framework, we do have Azure support. So all of the events that Chris just mentioned, you can just write your function, plug it into the specific event, and then trigger those functions based off that. It'll be in the show notes down below. But yeah, moving on. So what do you guys have planned for like Azure functions in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff that we kind of have like floating around, but we work on fairly short schedules. So like what we have kind of in the near term that, we're working on is we actually have application insights integration, which is kind of like, I'm trying to find an analogy to maybe some other services that are more AWS focused for some of your audience. It's more than CloudWatch. I guess it's like if you combine CloudWatch and X-Ray a bit, like that's kind of more along the lines of what you're thinking about. It's all about trying to get insights into how your application is running. And they GA'd last November for us. And so we started integrating with them once they GA'd. And you can actually now go to aka.ms/func-AI. I'll put a link somewhere for that. It's public now. And you can actually go turn on application insights integration for your functions now. It's kind of a quiet preview, so we're kind of doing it in small little batches to kind of increase our user base kind of in a gradual sense. But I've already been using the application insights integration for my stuff for the last few weeks now, and it's amazing. Like I can actually see the number of machines that we did end up scaling you out to. So like sometimes it's a mystery when you're using serverless, like because you're supposed to be abstracted away from the servers. But sometimes you're morbidly curious about it. So I know a lot of people who actually like add telemetry into their applications to figure out what machines they were running on, to figure out, well, how much am I being reused? Am I like being put on a lot of fresh new machines, and that's why cold start's happening in some cases. I've seen that a lot from people using like IO pipes and things along those lines to figure out how their serverless applications are running. With this, you'll be able to just get that kind of automatically. There's no instrumentation of your code you have to do. You just turn it on, and all this data flows into application insights, and you get live metric streams of like what's happening inside of your application. You get the ability to write very, very powerful queries against what you have had run in the past. You can set up alerts and things that will actually send you like an email or call a webhook, so you can actually trigger a function from an alert from there, and then have that go off there and do things kind of like, I guess, CloudWatch alerts for those of you familiar with CloudWatch.
Oh, that's cool. Is there a UI component to that where you can kind of see a graph of this function triggers this function that puts something in this database? Or
yeah, there's a little bit of that, but it's a little bit kind of early for some of the like having a DFD of how your application works. But we pushed a lot of requirements to the application insights team, and we're hoping to actually get a lot of stuff working this summer.
Gotcha. Cool. That's what I'm missing. I want to see a map of just all my microservices and like how they're interacting.
We had a advisor for us actually go ahead and write like a static analyzer, so you can take a look at all of your functions code, and it'll go and draw one of those things up for you. I think it only worked with a few services, but like it was a fairly cool first approach. We've had a lot of requests for basically having an automatic like DFD for your application. I think application insights is going to do that really well for us, and our goal is to make it so it works with all the Azure services. So if I have my microservices in a collection of like Azure functions and Service Fabric instances, or things running on Azure Container Service, I should be able to see them all working together. It shouldn't be just one compute service isolated, showing those microservices. I can have microservices in various flavors of compute. That's the whole point of microservices.
Right. Cool. So
I think the other thing
coming
I had
up
on my
with
list was we are working on new language support. So we had those other languages that are kind of in a half-baked state. And we are working out in the open on our GitHub right now, adding new languages. So I think the first one that we're trying to do is going to be Java. And then you'll see us working towards Python. But the goal is to make it so that it's actually extensible. So our goal is that you can actually just upload an executable or an application, and we'll run it as long as you implement our protocol that we have underneath the covers. So we could enable Go or R-based applications in that particular case without having really any stress about it. C++ applications, you could just upload a C++ binary. It has to be compiled for the right platform, but it would be able to theoretically work against this new model.
Cool. Let's see. So yeah, how do you guys prioritize these new features that you're working on? I saw you mentioned this in the previous demo that I watched, but yeah, where can people go to chime in what they really want to see happen next?
Yeah, I mean, if you just go to our GitHub page, I mean, that's essentially the biggest place, the github.com/Azure-Functions. We have a sense of what we want to do strategically for the platform, and so there's a couple of things that we'll go ahead and put on the roadmap that even people aren't requesting. But then any issue that really starts to get a lot of customer feedback saying like, oh, hey, we really need this, that's generally what we try to prioritize, is things that customers are telling us they need now. And the nice thing about having it all on GitHub is it's very easy to kind of have a conversation about that. We occasionally get requests for things. We're like, oh, we want this feature. And our first reaction is like, why? Like, I don't think you want that feature for the reason you want it. And then we get to have a conversation there about like, well, why do they actually need it? And then we have what we think is maybe a healthier, better suggestion for how to actually build that feature. And because we can have that back and forth on GitHub, and it's more than just PMs like myself, it can be the engineers themselves. A lot of this is actually just driven kind of in a somewhat democratic, maybe more anarchy style of like the devs will see a cool feature that a customer wants and just kind of go off and build it on their own. And so we get a lot of really just kind of organic growth of our product. I think one instance of that is like we're working on a couple of improvements for like our Node.js programming runtime, like promises, for instance, that came a while back. And that just happened because one of our devs saw that someone was requesting promises. He's like, oh, I can do that easily, and just did it and put it out there on the next PR. That got into the next build, and boom, people had promises support. And it didn't require a whole lot of back and forth in our team. We just kind of did it because we thought it was a good idea. And it went through code review, and no one thought it was going to cost us too much extra to maintain. So we went forward with it.
Cool. That's awesome. So if I was to get started with Azure functions today, where would you suggest that I start?
I mean, so the people listening on this call should probably start with the serverless framework, frankly, because they're going to all be very familiar with the tool there. So you can go to the serverless.com site, look for the docs page, go look for the Azure stuff, and our quick start's very, very quick. I'm actually really happy with the serverless framework tooling that we ended up building because it had some of the quickest, quick start experiences for customers that we've built. A lot of our experiences are very fast. Like we always kind of measure ourselves that people need to reach, a success state in under 5 minutes. But with serverless framework, we're able to do that in about 2. So we were really, really happy with the speed that we had there. So definitely start there. After you want to kind of go beyond the scope of what just we've built for serverless framework so far and want to kind of look at all the stuff we have going on for Azure Functions, you just go to functions.azure.com. That's our product landing page. And there's a lot of stuff there that'll help you kind of learn and get started with things. If you don't have an Azure account, we'll let you try using Azure Functions for an hour or more if you want, with just like a GitHub account, no credit card, no nothing. So that's a nice place to get started there, is to just try it out in
that experience, by the way, is amazing. What you guys did there, where you can just spin up something with no credit card and you can just try it out. Like the user experience on that is like second to none. So kudos on that. We're trying to do something similar. Like we got to get people up to speed quickly.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we were talking about was making it so that we can accept like another identity that people who use serverless framework would know, and then like provision you a backend to deploy your serverless functions onto. And so we're looking at something like that to make we really want people like that what I said before, where serverless framework gets started in 2 minutes is actually kind of a lie, because if you include the time that it takes to sign up for Azure, it starts to become much longer than 2 minutes. So we want to be able to truly get to 2 minutes by trying to remove some of the Azure subscription parts from getting started.
Gotcha. Cool, cool. Awesome. So, Chris, where can people find you online if they have any more Azure questions?
I mean, to reach out to the team in general, like GitHub's always like the best place. We also answer things on Stack Overflow pretty religiously. Our devs actually have a competition each week to see who can get the most points. Not organized by our management, just because all of our devs are very competitive with each other, and so they like to see who gets the most points. So that can always be kind of interesting because they'll yell at each other because someone submits the answer before the other one. So you can generally get pretty good support from Stack Overflow. If you ever feel like you need to reach out to me, you can reach me at CrandyCodes on Twitter, and that's generally one of the easiest ways. Otherwise, you can look on my GitHub profile. It's github.com/Christopher Anderson, and my email that you can reach out to me is on that profile.
Cool.
And I think I have open DMs, so like on Twitter. So if you ever want to reach out to me like privately, like you can do that fairly easy, and I respond sometimes crazy quick. So
nice. Yeah, Twitter is great for that. All right, so just to close out, I wanted to hear your thoughts on just the serverless ecosystem as a whole. Like, where do you see it going? Where do you want to see it go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I see is that serverless functions is becoming much more mature at this point. So I don't expect to see a whole lot of transformational changes inside of serverless functions. Maybe 1 or 2 big surprises left still, but nothing which is going to go ahead and open up a whole crazy wide new slew of scenarios the way that serverless first did when it first came out. I see the next big future in kind of doing that for applications as a whole. So how can we go ahead and make the rest of your application stack, the data layer, things along those lines, have that exact same feel, that exact same fun feeling as kind of writing serverless functions has had. And so I think that's kind of the next big frontier to go tackle, is how do we get it so people can write applications, end-to-end applications, their data, their API services, all that stuff, end-to-end as simply as possible, and help them maintain the actual application lifecycle. So have different staging environments, deal with API version changes, all the things beyond just writing a function that it takes to actually ship an application still. Like, as much as it's easy to write a function now with serverless functions, I think there's still a lot of headache around actually building an end-to-end application that things like Serverless Framework are helping with. I think every service provider, AWS and Azure included, is working really hard to make that easy. And I think that's where we'll see a lot of the focus, is trying to make it so that's just super dead simple, that we can really empower kind of the next generation of developers to be more productive than anyone has ever been before.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head where there's kind of a spectrum of serverless technology right now where, like, writing funnel and do stuff, all that stuff for you, but there's still like the database layer and all these other pieces that you still kind of have to tweak knobs and scale yourself and what have you. So I think
distribution, like, how does that work? Like, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Should be cool. Chris, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Here soon today with what's happening. All right. What is it? I don't.
The connection's being a little bit rough there. See everyone.
I don't know if you said anything or what.
I was just sitting there smiling.
Right, awesome.